thank you, everybody, for joining, and good afternoon to our next GMU Center for Satellite Earth Science Research webinar. We have these weekly, and today we're really happy to be joined by Dr. Allison Ring from the University of Maryland. She's a colleague of all of ours here at GMU, in our group, in our center, and a friend. And it's really, really great that she can join us today to talk about work in her air quality modeling research, largely related to ozone and other constituents, and very interestingly here, role of carbon capture as well, which I haven't really thought of much. So this sounds like an exciting topic. And I just want to do a quick introduction here, if I may. Dr. Allison Ring earned her PhD in 2019 from the University of Maryland, where she focused on analyzing tropospheric ozone production in the eastern United States using a combination of observational data, satellite retrievals, and air quality modeling platforms. She then pursued her postdoctoral research at NOAA Air Resources Laboratory in College Park. I worked with her there, actually, for a short period of time when we crossed paths. And she worked there on developing operational volcanic ash plume dispersion model within high split. And following this, Dr. Ring returned to the University of Maryland as an assistant research scientist in the Department of Atmospheric Oceanic Science. And in this role, she leads air quality modeling research for various applications, primarily using large-scale US EPA regulatory models like CMAC and CAMx. And Dr. Ring collaborates closely with a diverse group of partners, including the Maryland Department of Environment, the US Department of Energy, and nonprofit organizations. Allison's work also focuses on exploring chemical mechanism improvements, conducting ozone source apportionment studies and policy relevant modeling, and examining the air quality impacts of point source carbon capture technologies and data centers, which I think we'll hear more about today. So with that, I'll just pass the floor off to you, Allison.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Patrick. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to sharing a little bit about what I've been doing with the group here. I wanted to quickly thank all of the co-authors listed here. I work with a lot of people. These folks in particular have been really instrumental in the work that I'm going to discuss in this presentation. Joel Dries and Emily Bull and Roger Thunell are from MDE, and they are really great colleagues and great contacts. Everybody else listed there is from the University of Maryland, and it's in our group, so you probably are rather familiar with the names there. But none of this would be possible without them, so very much thankful for their help. Let's move. Yeah, okay. So I think the audience here is rather familiar with how air quality models work and what we model, so you all understand it's very complicated. I wasn't entirely sure who the audience was going to be for this, so my apologies for these basic introductory slides, but yeah, so moving on to the ozone production regime, I focus mostly on ozone because that is what MDE has been historically most concerned with, and modeling ozone and modeling ozone attainment. And obviously, I think most of us here are familiar with the NOx sensitive and VOC sensitive regime. And over the past two and a half decades, MDE has worked, and the state has worked really hard to transition Maryland from VOC sensitive to NOx sensitive. And we've seemed to have done that pretty successfully. And some of the modeling I'll show, I think, is pretty much proven that as well. But there's a lot of papers out there that have shown that Maryland has transitioned fully. I'm going to focus mostly on Maryland. All the modeling that I've done is for the whole, it's in the 12 US2 domain, or it's the whole CONUS domain. So I have results for any place you could really imagine across the lower 48, but I'm going to focus on Maryland for this talk. I don't think I have to go too much into this with this audience, but obviously ozone is a critical policy relevant pollutant that we need to figure out how to be in attainment in our region and all along the I-95 corridor. And so my work here for MDE for the past few years especially has been focused on that, but then also pursuing some more scientific research for the state as well. So that's been exciting to kind of branch out a little bit. Here's showing the stars over Baltimore. So we're showing that the Baltimore, at least half of the mainland, I guess, Maryland is out of attainment, or it's in the serious designation. And it's likely that that will continue at least to next year as well. So this is our main contributors to that are local pollution, obviously, but also historically pollution from downwind sources like these power plants here along the Ohio River Valley. And this is now back in 2006. So this is more of a discussion about ozone exceedance events and what has typically been causes for those and how wide-ranging they've been. So you can see this is a map of the AQI values at all the different monitoring sites back in 2006. And the middle day, which is the 18th, was a pretty big exceedance day. But I wanted to show how this exceedance plume was very broad scale and regional and moved from, I guess, the Midwest-ish area over into the East Coast. And that is very classic setup of what we were experiencing as causes for exceedance events on the Eastern seaboard back in the early 2000s. And a lot of that was due to this Bermuda High system kind of setting up here and bringing this pollution around this high from the Midwest out over to our region. And you can see anything that's orange and above, orange, red, or purple is an exceedance event. So that, and not at the time, I guess the standard was slightly lower, but for our current standard, which was passed in 2015, those would be exceedance events. And you can see how widespread it is. That's not always the case now. And often we have exceedance events, at least in the past few years, that have been very pocketed. So we'll have just one site or two sites in Maryland exceed, and the surrounding region won't have exceeded. So the causes for exceedance events, which is something that MDE is very concerned with, are changing. And that's part of what my research is right now, is trying to figure out why and what are some of those contributions. And so that's where we're going to bring in CAMx, and I'm running, well, sorry, next slide. So this is just another overview of the past. So this is from 1972 through 2024, and it's showing CO, NO2, and then surface ozone. These are the top third, and for surface ozone, it's the top third days and the bottom third days. The bottom third are the blue, and the top third are the red. And it's just showing how the trend has changed. Obviously, there's seasonality there between winter and summer, but overall, the trend of the worst days for all three of those pollutants has gone down, or the highest concentrations. But interestingly, the blue there is going up, so that's kind of indicating that background ozone is probably increasing. So our maximum and our background or minimum are converging at this point. So air quality has continuously improved. And the big question is, will this continue? We've definitely had some stagnation in the past, but then we had to have major policies passed by the government, and then we continued down our downward trends there. Some of those are highlighted here on the chart. And with an uncertain future, I'm not sure if that's going to continue. So the modeling that I do obviously is with CAMx, and I think everybody there is also familiar with CMAQ. I focus a lot on the emissions inventories and what we can learn from the different inventory sectors, along with the chemistry. But I'm modifying any chemistry for these runs. I'm focusing mostly on emission sectors and their contributions to ozone production. And that's done with the CAMx model. I've been running that myself for quite a few years now, and I ran CMAQ for my PhD. So I have some experience in that, but our resident CMAQ modeler here is Hauher. So he is definitely the one to go to if you have any CMAQ type questions. But the modeling that I did do with CAMx is with the 2016 V3 platform and the 12-kilometer resolution. Some may be wondering why we chose that. This modeling was executed this year. And it's because the 2022 V1 platform had some problems for the state of Maryland. Our emissions there, and I think it was the non-point sector, were not correct. And I think the 2022 V2 platform, which was just released this past month, has those corrections implemented, so we can use that platform. But for the study that I'm going to talk about, we couldn't use the 2022 V2 platform or V1 platform. So 2016 V3 was the best at the time. It's likely that it actually may be a little more representative of the future, because we could be reversing some of our policies that had been passed, and that seems to be the case. So we might be moving backwards in time in terms of emissions in the So also 2016 was warm. We had a lot of exceedances. There was some smoke influence from wildfires, so we could look at that in the model framework. So it was kind of a year that we could do a couple of test cases and try to explore different reasons for ozone exceedances, which was another plus. Obviously, we use the WRF meteorology in this. It's the same as what's on CMAC. I convert all the CMAC ready emissions into CAMx ready, so it's the exact same emissions that CMAC would use. I'm using the CB7R1 mechanism, which is something that is not in CMAC, and it will not be put into CMAC. So at this point, CAMx and CMAC are really starting to diverge. CAMx will never have CRACM. I've asked the developers about that. They said they can't implement that. It's just too complicated because CRACM has now absorbed its own PM chemistry modules as well as the gas phase, and it's linked all those together. And I guess that's just too complicated to try to code that into CAMx at this point. And I believe that CMAC does not have CB7R1 in it. I don't think it has plans to implement that either. So this might be a point where they're both really diverging, and we can't cross test chemical mechanisms between the two models anymore. But you guys may know better, but that was my understanding. So I'm going to be using this OSAT tool. It's called the Ozone Source Apportionment tool. The big difference between CAMx and CMAC is that they both do this. With the DDM direct decoupled method, I think, is with CMAC. CMAC can tag only a handful of sources at a time. CAMx can tag quite a few all at once. CMAC will tag every single species, like emissions species or chemical species, which is great. And that's so much information. CAMx will only tag ozone in this instance. And then you can also run PSAT and tag the PM species. So I can't source apportion formaldehyde, for example, with this model framework, but you could with CMAC. So there are some positives and negatives there. And for our use with MDE, they just were really focusing on ozone. So CAMx was the best way to go for that. I should have said this earlier, but please interrupt me if you have any questions. I know I told Patrick to do that, but if anybody else has stuff they want to add or questions or comments, please interrupt. I'm happy to have this be more conversational. I did this modeling over the course of a few months because it took 16 individual model simulations to run one day. And that's because we were really taxing the memory of the model. The developers actually were like, why are you trying to do this? They had never intended CAMx to be run with this many tags all at once. So the big issue was these point sources. There's over 1 million different point sources in this domain. And that's a huge memory hog to track all of those different point sources across the US. So I had to run every simulation with only 4 geographic tags, so any 4 mapped tags here. And then I could run all of these emissions tags at the same time, and I could run all of these emissions tags at the same time. So it took kind of piecewise run of the model to finally get a full output for one day, which is over 625 tags of state and sector tags for one day. So all the states that you see individually colored here, they're all tagged individually at some point in the run. The ones that are the same color, like the ones out west, those are a group. We just didn't have enough time, I guess, to run all the west individually. The big addition to our model here was that we actually were able to tag Western US and then have the Western boundary. In the past, we'd always run at about the OTC2 domain, which I think included Texas, but that was where the boundary was. So we had a lot of influence from the Western boundary. So MDE wanted to understand, is that coming from outside the US? Is that coming from, China, the Pacific Ocean, or is that coming from the Western US? So that's why we wanted to at least have that chunk in there. We also ran this map for these specific tagged emissions because, again, we were trying to optimize and keep the minimal amount of runs required to do the modeling that MDE wanted. And for the fires, regional groupings were appropriate enough. same as well with agriculture and residential wood combustion, although I think residential wood combustion we might end up going back to and looking at. For PSAT, we'll probably do that one individually because I think that will be pretty important there. But this is how we grouped these specific tags, emissions tags. And then we ran with the APCA setting. And for those who are not familiar, it's a policy relevant setting for OSAT. And it basically just chooses if the model has an opportunity to designate the ozone that's formed as either sourced from an anthropogenic or a biogenic source, it will choose the anthropogenic source. That way, policymakers have even more that they can work with to try to reduce that ozone. So if the model can, it will not choose it as a biogenic source. It will choose that ozone to be considered anthropogenic. So this is a snapshot of the 2016 ozone exceedance events for the state. I'm going to do one case study. We're in the process of trying to understand all of these. We haven't all next year. We plan on analyzing these model results. So we're just beginning right now. But I'm going to focus on the 29th here. This is an interesting case. I'm going to show you figures about Essex, Maryland, which is right outside Baltimore. It's at the northern part of the Chesapeake Bay. But there were 3 other sites that exceeded as well. It's not a massive exceedance event like we have for a couple other days, but the model actually didn't really missed these super high exceedances at these sites, and it captured it in some places. I think it captured it like in Calvert, for example, but it really missed these extremes here, and I need to look into why that happened. But 2016, like I said earlier, was there were a lot of exceedances in it. These two up here in May 25, May 26, you could see the number of sites that exceeded were 13 and 15. That's an incredible number of sites to exceed on one. That means it's like pretty much all over the state. And that was actually wildfire influenced. And I don't think we'll have time, but I do have a backup slides about this. And it was the wildfires from the Fort McMurray fires happening in early May in Canada, outside of our model domain. They mixed in with pollution out in the Midwest to the south, and that was brought up to our region. And the model was able to, for the most part, capture that. It didn't attribute it to fire exactly because those fire emissions came in via the boundary layer or the boundary, the boundary, but the boundary condition. But it did eventually calculate the ozone more or less correctly, which was encouraging. Yeah. So this is just a map. This is Essex is up here. For reference, I'm about here and you guys are over here, I guess. So yeah, Essex is a very common exceedance site in the state, along with Edgewood. It used to be that Edgewood was the problem child, but I think actually it's Essex now. I think that's taken the role. Anyway, so this is that July 29th exceedance event. We're looking at the 28th, 29th, and 30th here. And as you can see, if you remember back to the 2006 figure that I showed that looked just like this, exceedance events are not just region wide anymore. Those orange dots are the only places that exceed it. So it's really pocketed now and a bit more nuanced, I would say. We still have the larger swaths of near exceedance, which is all that yellow, but we don't have this, the entire eastern half of the US in exceedance or near exceedance anymore. And this was an interesting case because we had this low pressure system sitting kind of just slightly north, and it had come up, and on the 28th, it had kind of come up the coast a little bit, and it set up here on the 29th. And so there was this high pressure system over here, and we're pulling in air down so it's coming south from Pennsylvania into Maryland. And it seems that the OSAT work that I'm going to show next did really pick that up. So this was interesting because if you look at this bar chart, this is a snapshot of 8-hour ozone for the month at Essex. So on the x-axis here, the day of the month in July. The y-axis is the ozone concentration. It's the 8-hour ozone concentration. All these little asterisks, there's white when they're inside the bar and black when they're outside the bar, are the surface observations from the AQS sites. The black down here is the boundary condition contribution. So that's ozone attributed to the boundary condition. The purple is Maryland, the red is Pennsylvania, and so on. And then the grayed out part is just to try to reduce the amount of colors that are on this chart. There's a lot. We have, again, we have like 40 different states tagged, so there's quite a few colors in these. The pluses down here is ozone that's formed in the VOC sensitive regime. So as you can see, vast majority of the ozone is formed in NOx sensitive. That's typically, it's what I was saying earlier, and that's expected. The 27th here, we have a pretty big miss, and that's what I alluded to before. That's a very big miss for the model, and that's something that I'm looking into. But the 29th here, which is this massive red bar, that's an uncharacteristic contribution from Pennsylvania. And based on the meteorological setup, where we have that air coming down from Pennsylvania, this is, I guess, not unexpected. It's just unique for the month. So the model seemed to pick that up anyway, which was great. These green arrows are showing where the model and the AQS site both registered as an exceedance. So they didn't necessarily have to have the same value, but they both exceeded above 70 ppb for their 8-hour ozone, which was great. That's 6 out of 10 sites. That's not terrible for the model performance. These red arrows are where either the model exceeded or the site exceeded and the other one did not. So that's where they're not saying the same thing. This one is, sorry. Can you still see it? Okay. I don't know what happened.
Well, we see it's not in slideshow mode anymore.
Not in slideshow mode anymore. What?
At least what we see. But maybe you can just click it back and go
Okay. Sorry. No, it went, I don't know what
We
happened.
see your second slide, Allison.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's what I'm looking at. I don't know how that happened or why that happened. Let me just restart it again.
Yeah. Yeah. That looks
You see
good.
it? Okay.
Great. Yep. Thanks.
I don't know why I did that. Anyway, sorry. Oh, why does it keep doing this? Sorry, let's try one more time. Continue to share. Continue to share. What is happening? Oh man.
Allison, what are the plus signs in the black?
That is okay, I think I have to reshare. I'm sorry. But to answer your question, that is the VOC sensitive formed ozone. So that's ozone that's formed in the VOC sensitive regime. I'm just going to try this. Okay, that's not helpful. Okay, let's go with that.
Okay.
Apologies. So this, yeah, the pluses there are where ozone is formed in the VOC sensitive regime. So it's really minimal. I mean, it's definitely less than 20 ppb in total for the column, the total bar there. But it's generally less than 10 even. So it's a lot less VOC sensitive formed ozone. Generally that would happen in like urban corridors, but domain wide, that's not really the case anymore here. So this is just bringing your eye back to the 29th here and really want to focus on this red bar. That is the impetus for studying or looking at this day. And so now we have a surface. Let me move these. Oh my gosh. I can't move these, can I? Yes. There. Okay. So now we have, this is the surface hourly ozone concentrations coming down from Pennsylvania on the left and Maryland on the right. And if you look, the color bar here is at 50 ppb and the red. So it's quite a bit of ozone. Remember those bar charts I was showing before, those are 8-hour average. So you're not going to see 50 ppb for that. But for these are hourly contributions. As you can see, this is state of Maryland. The X's are the different sites, and the red ones that are the red circled ones here in the middle, those are where we had an exceedance. So you can see this plume really develops in Pennsylvania and it comes down, which is what the meteorology was showing us before as well. And for context, this is Maryland's contribution, quite a bit right around 495, which is running around DC. And then it also kind of moves south and east a little bit. So this now, we're looking at the sector contributions from the two states. So this is now just the on-road diesel component, the on-road diesel sector. And it really balloons out right here in Pennsylvania. That is, I'm thinking, I-78, Interstate 78, which comes out of New Jersey here, comes out of New York City, out of New Jersey, and then kind of moves over to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And as someone who used to live on I-78 in my days in New Jersey, it is heavily trafficked by diesel trucks. And on this day, it seems like that was a significant contribution anyway. Philadelphia is over here, so it's likely not Philadelphia-related diesel activity. This is Maryland here, and you can see diesel trucks right around 495, and we've seen that quite a bit living locally here. And that's also coming up in the model. This is the on-road gas. So it should be generally in the same location. Obviously, there's more gas roads that are traveled more heavily by gas vehicles, but generally the emissions from those are better controlled, and we're seeing that in the model. So the diesel impact to ozone formation is pretty large, at least certainly for the 2016 ozone season. And then this now is the EGU impact. And as you can see, that's quite significant, and it's very siloed, and it's not, it's not widespread plumes. They're pretty narrow plumes, and they have a big impact. And I've done a little bit of searching as to which power plants those could be. There are quite a few big coal ones right over the border there. So this is fairly accurate for what I would expect, and I think it's probably on target. I won't say which coal power plants those are, but there are a few that were in operation at that time. In Maryland, our influence from EGUs is pretty minimal. So it's definitely Pennsylvania EGUs that were impacting these three sites. And then this is the non-road sector. This is more of a catch-all for combustion vehicles. This would include construction, lawn equipment, pleasure craft boats, a variety of things. So, different uses for them. But this also has a big impact. So it's typically across the whole modeling time, which was from April through October 1, so really through September. These four sectors are the main contributors. It's the on-road diesel, on-road gas, EGU, and non-road. Sometimes there's others in there that are quite impactful, but generally those are the four. So this is now the same figure as before, just broken down by sector and not state. And as I was saying before, the on-road diesel, the EGU, on-road gas, and non-road are the top four. Then we have BICE in this instance and point non-EGU. So that would be point emissions that are like cement kilns and manufacturing with point emissions as opposed to power plants. They're just not power plants. So some things
Allison,
I'm sorry. Yeah, BH has his hand raised.
Oh yeah, please.
So if you go back to one slide back, so I get the other one,
This one.
the pie
Okay.
chart. Yes.
Yeah.
Stack bar. So that black is a boundary condition based on what I'm seeing in the model domain. The most of the boundary condition ozone is coming from on the East Coast?
Generally, we did break it down to north, south, east, west, so we could pull that out for every single day. They're all added together here. But generally, it's the Canadian border that we get the biggest contribution from. Yeah, that's generally it. There are some instances where we have I think what it is recirculation out from New York City, and then it kind of comes back around again, and that comes in as an eastern boundary condition. We rarely have impacts from the western or the southern boundary, and for that matter, the western boundary. So it's almost I would say 90% of the time it's the Canadian boundary.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. So just a quick wrap up here. It's very evident based on this OSAP modeling that Pennsylvania through these Maryland sites over and its exceedance. Maryland didn't have enough local emissions to do that. So that's one of the cool things with OSAT. It's not necessarily quantitatively correct, but we could look at relative contribution and see that Pennsylvania had an inordinate amount of contribution to the total ozone that was in the model anyway on this day, and observe or meteorological like separate meteorological analysis shows that we did have the setup that would be appropriate for this. So it is likely true that Pennsylvania emissions came across the border and impacted our sites. Now, according to this, this diagram or this GIF, it will look like that quite a few more sites in Maryland should exceed. And that the model did have more sites in exceedance. The model had, I think, another 10 in exceedance, not very heavily, it's like 70, 71 ppb. So the model is hot as it usually is. But I think what happened for these 3 sites is that, you remember how we had that plume around 495 for Maryland, and then we have this coming across the border from Pennsylvania, and it's really right about there that those 2 plumes, I'll call them plumes, but like state contributions, intersect the most. And I think that's why those 3 sites actually did exceed, and as the others did not. Edgewood came very close. Edgewood, so I would like to note that is very close to exceeding there, but it didn't exceed. So some of the other sites were also very close, like 69 ppb. So it was close in observations, but over it with model. So we just taking these results from OSAT with a grain of salt, understanding it's not exactly those concentrations. It's OSAT is showing us relative contribution and source apportionment of where that pollution is coming from that we're observing, which is a powerful, which is the power of this tool. So, yeah, if there's any more questions about this is all I'm going to show on OSAT right now. I'm going to switch gears now to the point source carbon capture modeling that I've been doing with CAMx. But if there's any more questions on OSAT, happy to talk about it. This is still new and quite exciting for me, so I could talk quite a bit about it. So moving on now to the data.
Allison.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think on OSAT, I think Gilran Zhang has a question.
Yes. Hi, Allison. This is Gilran. Yeah, so according to your result, if then you remove Pennsylvania transportation, in Maryland never exceed the ozone 70 ppb. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think if we were, you meaning like the Pennsylvania on-road emissions? If we were to
Yes.
remove those, yeah,
Uh-huh.
I don't know that we would have exceeded. EGUs definitely were a strong player here. So that may have been enough to put 1 or 2 of the sites over, but the on-road diesel and on-road gas were, certainly contributing from Pennsylvania. So, I mean, it's tough to say, but if we were to be able to remove a state's contribution, then yes, we would not have exceeded.
I have one more quick question.
Yep.
So your stack graph, so it seems like a VOC, that you have many factors. So
I'm sorry, which graph?
No, back to the stack. Yeah, this one.
This one? Okay.
Yeah, so you're plus the VOC sensitivity.
Yeah.
So when you're considering the correlation between VOC sensitivity to your many other emission sources factors, which factors has the largest correlation and which one is lowest? Seems like a total ozone concentration that is not quite related to the VOC sensitivity in this region.
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're asking.
My question is the VOC sensitivity that is not quite correlated with the total ozone concentration here.
Well, it's not that it's not correlated, it's that not much of the total ozone that is tracked to this grid box at Essex was formed in a VOC sensitive regime. So that plus in the column there is showing the total amount of ozone, which let's say is about 8 or 9 ppb. This is of the 8-hour ozone. is formed in the VOC sensitive regime. That's what that plus is showing. And the rest of the height of that bar, from the plus to the top of the bar, that's what's formed in the NOx sensitive regime.
I see. Okay, so if then it seems like NOx sensitivity regime is of course, yeah, right. NOx sensitivity regime, that is the characteristics of this area in ozone concentrations, right?
Right, but remember, this is ozone coming from other places too. Like, it's not just ozone formed here locally. That's the
Alright.
beauty of OSAT, is that it's tagging it and it's being formed in places like Ohio and coming across, or its precursors are coming from Ohio and forming on its way here, but it's being, the reason it's occurred or it's formed is from emissions that were added by another state. So that's, I don't want you to think that it's all ozone that was created here locally and only this amount of it, 5%, 10% of the ozone was actually formed in VOC sensitive regimes here. That's not always the case.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Allison, quick question.
Yeah.
I maybe missed it in the earlier your presentation. 2016. Is there a particular reason is you choose 2016 versus now there's a newer version? And you talked about 2022 version 1 did not work out, but version 2 maybe.
Yeah, version 2 maybe. That came out a couple of weeks ago. I think
Right.
that we could actually download. We were doing this, we started this in April, I think. We went back and forth on this a lot with MDE, and we ultimately decided on 2016 because it was such a hot year for exceedances. There were over 20 exceedances. We had the fire influence that we knew we could test. And then we had a lot of other sources for those exceedance events. There's a week in July, 9 days in July, that 7 of the 9 exceeded. So there was some episode happening that we could really look at. So it's just provided a lot of case studies that we could try to examine and understand ozone formation now, as opposed to 20 years ago.
So you're alternatively updating the emissions, all those newer emissions in the 2022, but you still model 2016. Is that how you're?
We didn't use 2022 emissions at all. We only used 2016. We used the 2016 version 3. I'm hoping in the future, our future plans are to run PSAT for MDE at some point, and we'll do that with 2022, I'm assuming.
I'd love to talk to you because we are actually doing the PSAT over DC and the Philadelphia area.
Oh, fantastic.
Also with the CAMx PSAT.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yep.
will be something we talk. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. So real quick, data, this is totally switching gears. So I'm glad we covered a lot of that stuff with OSAT. This is now CAMx modeling just without OSAT. So this is just straight CAMx modeling. It's still with the same emissions inventory, but it's with an older version of CAMx. It's with CB6R5 mechanisms. So it's just slightly different, but it's the same emissions as well. Data centers are an emerging sector that currently is not modeled in the emissions inventories. The EPA doesn't have that in there even as a separate sector or in the non-point sector. So because our region is very impacted by that, I think it's important that we start trying to explore how to model that in the current model framework. So this is a map. If you go to this website down here, datacentermap.com, you can click on any of these bubbles and it tells you the number of data centers in every state. So Virginia is the capital of the world with 666 right here. Particularly Ashburn and Sterling, Virginia are the capital, biggest concentration of data centers. Maryland has 44 with about 14 of them in Baltimore. There's some up here in Northern Maryland. But MDE as a whole is really interested in trying to understand what's happening emissions-wise from these data centers coming from Virginia across the border into Virginia or into Maryland. So MDE has a motivation for this to understand this as well. Data centers are projected to consume 15% of the total US electricity by 2040. So that's all electricity that the entire US uses is going to go to just data center production or operation. A lot of these data centers are built currently with diesel generators as emergency backup sources. But because they're pulling such a demand on the current energy grid, which doesn't have the capacity really to support that kind of increased demand that quickly, those diesel generators are being used a lot, and they are unregulated because they are in the emergency sector, or they're classified as emergency. So emergency use. So these are essentially like running diesel trucks next to these facilities all the time, and whenever they're running, which is more frequently than not. And we saw from the previous OSAT output that on-road diesel is a very significant contribution to ozone in the region. So this is a major issue for air quality, but also health. I mean, diesel exhaust, as we all know, is pretty terrible health-wise as well. So PSAT, I think, will be really interesting for that as well, to explore the particulate creation from that. So this is kind of a motivation for some of the point source carbon capture modeling, because it's a possibility that we could, if we implemented point source carbon capture to remove CO2 and, more importantly, the NOx and SO2 for air quality purposes, which is required for this to really work, we could be improving air quality while still meeting the electricity demands that these data centers are going to put on our grid. So point source carbon capture, in a nutshell, is trying to capture CO2 from the flue gas coming out of power plants and keep that from going out of the smokestack, out into the atmosphere, and sequester that in some way. I am not part of the sequestration part of point source capture and sequestration, carbon capture and sequestration. Thank you. I just am looking at the emission side of that. There are three main methods. There's cryogenic, direct air, and amine solvent capture. I'm only going to talk about amine solvent, especially for the sake of time now. It is currently in use on submarines, so it is a proven technology. It has been tested at large facilities. This is the NCCC in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm right there. I went down there for a conference and learned a lot about carbon capture. It's quite a robust research field and engineering field. The EPA did pass a ruling I think it was last year, that we should be trying to capture reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 90%. And point source carbon capture would be a huge way to do that, because you'd be capturing CO2 at its source rather than trying to suck it out of ambient air, which would be much more inefficient. Basically, this would require building a whole new capture system. So everything in the blue box here is what's in current EGU stacks, obviously idealized, but a schematic. The green is what would have to be added. So the main points here are, we have to bypass the current stack. We'd have to do some more scrubbing of SO2 and NO2, and we have to build a new stack for that exhaust. What happens in here, I'm less concerned with. I'm happy to discuss, if there's questions about it. I have a working knowledge. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I understand generally how things are going on here. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to bust through this. But I'm happy to go back and talk about this a little bit more if there are some questions. So the modeling that I'm doing is looking at the baseline scenario, obviously unadjusted, and then we're scrubbing that NOx and SO2. So this is required to reduce the possibility of forming nitrosamines in the atmosphere, which are very toxic, both in water and in the air. So we really want to keep that from coming out of these stacks. So NOx and SO2 are really needed to be scrubbed, which is great news, because that's going to have a huge impact on air quality. It's taking what's already scrubbed and scrubbing it even further. So we're cleaning up the emissions that way. Then we are going to explore temperature modifications, because flue gas temps can be no greater than 40 degrees Celsius because of amine degradation. So these amines are sensitive to high heat, and that flue gas is typically much hotter than this. I mean, on the order of like 100 to 200 degrees Celsius. So that will impact a few dispersion calculations, I would assume, in the model. And so that's kind of what I want to test it here with the temperature modification. Additionally, the stack height. If they're having to build new stacks, it's a lot cheaper to build shorter stacks than taller stacks. So we're going to explore, what does that do in the model framework if we reduce the height of these stacks down to only 40 meters, which is about the average nationwide, believe it or not. And then finally, assuming we have time, there's a couple of VOC adjustments that would be expected. Ammonia acetaldehyde and formaldehyde are expected to increase by hundreds to thousands of percentage. That seems like a lot. There's not a lot of that comes out of EGUs as it is. So it's not actually a lot, but it is increasing those emissions. And I wanted to explore what that does to air quality. So starting with particulate matter, we have our scrubbed NOx on the left, baseline in the middle, and the difference on the right. So really the difference is what you want to focus on mostly. So this is for January. I ran these for just January and July because we were just testing scenarios here. And you can see obviously there's the hotspots, the PM hotspots in urban areas and around point sources, but it seems like a domain-wide decrease in PM micrograms per cubic meter of on the order of 1, between 0 and 1 in January. But in July, it's a much larger impact. And you can see the most of that impact is along the Ohio River Valley here, where we have a lot of EGUs and a lot of big emitters of EGUs, along with Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And it looks like a big impact to Maryland concentrations of PM 2.5. This is also really important because of the reduction in the annual PM standard. Maryland is close to that 9 microgram per cubic meter annual standard. So any reductions coming in the future would be welcomed, to say the least. This is now the ozone impact of scrubbing the NOx and SO2, and as you'd expect, that's got a big impact on ozone, which is great to see. I think the maximum in this domain here in this grid box, or the domain here is about 11 ppb, and this is an MDA8. So this is a astronomical difference in ozone. And again, right along the Ohio River Valley, but it's impacting areas that we know are in non-attainment of ozone. So this would probably bring a lot of those areas either close to attainment or within attainment if this technology were to be implemented on every single power plant across the US. So that's encouraging as well. Okay, yeah. And I just highlighted the non-attainment regions here and how this will impact those regions. Now we're looking at the adding in temperature modifications. So this is what I said before about how we have to reduce the temperature. So now we're looking at just the impact on reducing that temperature. This is in that scrubbed and NOx and SO2 framework. So it's just what would be added to that already, the decreases that we saw before. And in fact, it's not actually decreasing anymore. It would increase PM. And that's, I think, because of the reduction in temperature. That plume is not flying out of the smokestack anymore. It's kind of staying more local. And so you see maybe increases around little local sources here. And this is essentially flat, maybe slightly increases, but I mean, it's really minimal impacts on MDA8. This is now looking at stack heights. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with EGUs as a whole across the US domain. And this is now the color bar is in height, and 300 meters is very tall. But there are some stacks in the Ohio River Valley region that are that are between 250 and 300 meters in height. Because they're in a valley and they need to get their exhaust, their flue gas up high enough out of the valley so that it doesn't smoke out the valley and cause pollution down there. So it also helps get that pollution out of Ohio and into, for example, Maryland. These smokestacks are pretty high in that region, but as you can see, the vast majority of the U.S., it's much lower. So that's why I went down to the 40 meters. That could be anything. If we tell engineers they have to build it at 150, 200 meter stack heights, they will do that. They just want to know what do they need to meet as far as engineering is concerned to not make air quality worse. So reducing that stack height, and especially in those high stack areas, has a big impact on PM, which is what I would expect. So it's keeping a lot of that pollution close to home. That PM is forming close to home, and it's not traveling too far. It doesn't have a huge impact on ozone. Again, we're scrubbing that NOx and SO2 was the big impact on ozone. That's where we're really going to get the biggest bang for our buck. So this is the overall with those three modifications made. And you can see that it's a big impact on MDA8. Again, mostly that's almost entirely due to the NOx and SO2 scrubbing. But we do have some pockets where the PM benefits are really canceled out or reversed because of the temperature and stack height modifications that are potentially needed. So This is important for the engineers because we can be proactive with what we're telling them they need to do, and say, you know what, you can't go low, you got to go high. If you either need to figure out how to go back into the previous stack, the stack that's already there, or you need to build a stack that's just as tall as that one. So it's good for them. They want to know that information. This is the VOC influence. So this is just the larger domain. As you can see, the vast majority of EGUs are on the eastern half of the US. So that's where we get all the air quality associated with them. The western part is much cleaner as a whole. So that's why you don't see much going on out west. But now we're increasing VOCs. And as I said, we're hundreds to thousands percentage-wise, but it's not actually a lot in actuality, because we just don't have a lot of acetaldehyde, formaldehyde, or ammonia coming out of our current emission or smokestacks, our current flue gas. So overall, it's not a huge impact. It would be an increase, as we would expect, but it's not massive, which is good to know. And then, yeah, I know we're pretty much really short on time. So I think I really said a lot of these findings, but I wanted to just touch base real briefly on some of the future things we're doing, and that hopefully we could collaborate really closely with you guys on, because I know I'm really happy to hear you guys are doing some PSAT work. But that is something that I think we could really benefit from each other in the future there. So unfortunately, the work that I'm currently doing, that I was doing with this point source carbon capture, is put on hold for the Department of Energy because agency alignments or administration alignments are not quite there. So we're hoping to find a new way to align this work with the priorities of the administration and continue. But right now it's at a stagnation. So future work, we ran the Equates CMAC. How ran this? I did not run this. This was a massive undertaking, and it's an incredible amount of modeling that we've done. Would love to try to share that information with you guys, work together, collaborate on some projects. We're currently pursuing some health impact studies with this. Tim Canty and I are doing that with some colleagues up in University of Buffalo, but we are open to all sorts of collaboration with this, and how it's incredible what he did. So really grateful for that. And Akanksha's been doing some of this too, I should say. We are planning to run PSAT. MDE is looking to have some PSAT modeling to go along with this OSAT modeling. Right now, our larger priority with MDE is to do some GCAM and CMAC coupled modeling. So GCAM is a model that produces emissions projections for climate scenarios. So we're going to try to produce some climate Maryland-focused climate change scenarios that they've implemented in the state, and understand how that's going to impact emissions moving forward, and then cycle that back to how does that impact the bay, the Chesapeake Bay. So using the deposition files from CMAC, how is that going to impact the bay? So this is kind of a circular study that we're planning to do next year. But eventually we want to add in PSAT. So I don't know if I'll get a head start on that next year, if that's going to have to wait till the following year for MDE, but that is a work in progress. And you all are pretty familiar with PSAT, so we're planning to do that. I don't have to go through there. And then this is just some final thoughts. So I think I got it right on time. But OSAT's really great. It's a powerful tool. We have so much modeling, more than we probably could handle ourselves. So we're happy to try to, if there's anything in 2016 that you feel like could be a great comparison or interesting comparison, we'd love to entertain that. The point source carbon capture, I mean, we have to understand it. The EPA has got to develop some data center and point source carbon capture emissions. We need the chemistry and the models for the amine degradation in the atmosphere. What does that look like? There's some big leaps, I think, coming, but that is an area that we have to move towards as a community, because that's a big impact to air quality in our local area, and it's we're all going to feel it. So I'll leave it there.